Hey guys, and welcome to episode number 11 of the VIP Collective. Okay, so we'll start and we'll see if I can do it. If I can't, you can back me up.
No, it's good. We're good.
Well, welcome to the VIP Collective.
Thank you.
So for everyone who is watching and listening, we are sitting with Don Sagarese.
Perfetto.
Did I do it?
You did it.
Amazing.
Did it.
From 10tation. So you are VP of Sales and Marketing for 10tation?
Yeah, I mean, titles being what they are. Yeah, I'm vice president of the company, but it focuses virtually exclusively on sales and marketing, and then, of course, how that aligns with the operations of the company. And we are caterers and event planners.
Yes.
So we focus on 4 particular areas, and that helps define who we are. It's corporate events, intimate affairs, big bashes, and weddings. And each of those categories seems to encapsulate everything to do with social and event catering.
Fun. Now, we haven't met before.
We have not.
But I know that we have been on events together because I know that you and your crew were involved with Biblio Bash.
We are.
And I was lucky enough to be the team to film that.
Thank you. And you did a marvelous job.
So,
and Biblio Bash is definitely something we're proud to collaborate on.
Such a beautiful event,
It's
too.
a beautiful event. Of course, the benefits of that event are far-reaching, and we're happy to be able to work on events that have a social impact,
Of course.
as well as a financial impact.
Yeah, those charity and fundraisers are always kind of a nice outlet, right?
Feel good.
Why don't we talk, before we get into kind of the portion of the business, let's talk just a little bit about you and give everyone a, who are you?
Ooh, enough about me. Let's talk about me for a moment. Thank you.
Don Sagarese?
Yes. So my sort of history in special events, I entered the industry for a very simple and funny reason. I asked my father one day, I was about 13 years old, and I said, "Dad, how do you get girls?" And my father just smiled and he said, "You get a job." And so I made it from that moment my mission to get a job, because I just wanted to keep in the company of the young girls that I was associating with.
Fair enough.
And so there was an open casting call at a banquet hall in the West End, and it essentially said, show up, bring a tuxedo jacket, a bow tie, and come for a casting call to be a server at a banquet hall. And at that time, being a young man with no money, but a lot of ambition, I had to find a solution to where I could find a tuxedo jacket and a shirt. And I went to one of those small tuxedo rental places where there was this very kindly elderly gentleman that ran it. And I essentially pleaded my case. I said, "May I borrow a tuxedo jacket and a shirt and tie so I can go and get a job?" And being of the generation that he was, he immediately said, "I'll do one better. Go and get that job, and I'll give you the tuxedo jacket." So, as with all these kinds of stories, there's these little moments that are defining in one's life. So, I mean, thanks to my dad's advice and thanks to this kindly old fella, I got a job which led me to a lifetime in hospitality.
And he followed through on his promise with
Gave
the
me the
tuxedo.
jacket, and I still have the jacket as some sort of memorabilia hanging in my closet.
Of course.
Yeah, this tuxedo jacket that's been worn by unknown numbers of people and then lived with me for many years.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's fun.
Very cool. So you obviously realized that this was kind of your passion and what you wanted to do. And so how did you end up kind of merging into where you are now and working with 10tations?
Well, my story is sort of it is classic in the sense of passion, enthusiasm, hard work lead to one becoming who they are. So I've struggled, as most people do in hospitality, on many occasions with, should I be here? Is this who I am? Am I having the impact on the world that I want? All the ego-driven things that one thinks of. I was fortunate to get a post-secondary education, and I had aspired to become a lawyer, and I got into law school, but then I decided this wasn't for me, and I didn't know how. So the classic part of the story is, I'm a guy who was a dishwasher, who turned a waiter, who turned a maitre d', who turned operations, front of house management, opened my own catering and events company, which I ran for the better part of 20 years.
Wow.
Then struggled a little bit with that, was invited to teach at George Brown College in tourism and hospitality, which I did for 5 years. But then found that was frustrating because things at a college move at a glacial pace. And the thing about hospitality and events is that it moves at lightning speed. So there was this juxtaposition between who I am and who I was trying to be. And ultimately, I decided to get back into hospitality and events, and that's a whole other story I'm happy to share.
That's it's funny because when you're, like you said, you were obviously teaching, and as a business owner as well, it's just in your nature to move fast pace.
Correct.
And so I can see how you would probably feel a little handcuffed.
Yeah, well, in a business environment, 1 + 1 can equal 2. In traditional political environments, administrative environments, government environments, 1 + 1 tends to equal 3. And being a person that prides himself on common sense, it didn't work. So I wanted to get back into a field where vision could become reality in sort of 5 easy steps.
Yeah. Do you believe that if you start when you're younger, like your trajectory was obviously like a graduated system, and now you are to where you are today, but the success came from really following the passion? Because you obviously had the passion right from an early age, right? But you can see how that really plays out.
I think it's an interesting combination. Without being too cliche, there is such thing as luck and timing. And when you say something like that to someone younger, they may not fully understand,
right,
by no fault to their own. But when you start reflecting on your career, there is a lot of luck and timing that's part of it. So the experience at George Brown College was a very good one. As I reflected on it, I felt it was negative, but my better half was careful to tell me that every single thing we do in this world has an impact on what we're going to do next. And so the experience at George Brown College allowed me to maintain a relationship with a younger generation, with new trends, with new ideas, both in a social and traditional media platform. What it also did, by no definition of my own, was now set me up for the future, because all of these young people who I was fortunate enough to teach over the last 5 years have now entered the marketplace and are now both employees of mine and clients of mine.
Amazing.
So, staying true and staying focused to one's craft can often be more important than allowing your ego to get in the way.
Absolutely. And not looking at it as like a waste of years, but yet gaining all of these people who are now driven to want to do things, and you have those connections to do that. So
correct, absolutely.
Cool. So then how did you meet David? So David is the president of the company?
So David is the president and the owner and the founder of 10tation Event Catering. And our interesting story is that for the better part of 20 years, we were competitors. So the company I had owned competed with 10tation Events for the better part of those 20 years. But we always had a very congenial relationship, and just based on the timing and our competitor pool, David and I were the only 2 Italian guys that would show up at every meeting. So, there is something to be said for a cultural affinity, and we maintained a lovely friendship. And after I left George Brown, I started calling on people that I knew to, quite frankly, see if they wanted any support. It wasn't like a huge fishing expedition for a new job per se, but it was just to see who I could collaborate with. And David said he's the consummate gentleman, and he's very complimentary. And when I called him, he said, quite frankly, Don, you're a better salesman than I am, and you're a better talker than I am. I have something we can work on together. And I said, okay. And I showed up at the office, where the staff, of course, got into a bit of a natural panic because a suit and tie walks in and nobody knows who or when or why.
Right.
I worked on a request for proposal document from a large client for the better part of a week. We submitted that to the client, and before the RFP closed, the client called and invited us to Montreal because they said it was the most impressive proposal they had seen on a global scale. And so David and I flew to Montreal. We had a meeting and we signed a multi-year agreement with Cirque du Soleil.
Wow.
And over some cocktails late at night in Montreal, we hatched this idea that I would join his team. I would help lead the team. And, the rest, as they say, is history.
That's amazing.
Here we are.
Yeah, that's so interesting that, like, you knew David through a certain aspect, and then you guys actually merged. It becomes a powerful team when you kind of decide to do something like that.
It can be. And I think especially in events, one wants the comfort of knowing people with a proven track record. Because in events, whether they are weddings or they are corporate or they are large festivals, familiarity doesn't breed contempt. It actually gives people a bit more confidence that your particular part of the operation is going to be covered. And so it's not to say that young people don't deserve a chance. They do. But it's our obligation, guys like David and I with a lot of tenure in the business, to train the next generation so that we improve the industry as a whole. Because the better our industry gets, the more it will reflect on our city, on our multicultural dimension of the city, and the quality and caliber of events on a global scale.
Absolutely. And I feel like with the Raptors now taking a bit of a lead, we might be under a little bit more of a microscope these days, right?
I think so. I think we might, which is a lot of fun because it's going to allow people in my position to just explore broader opportunities in more places at a larger scale with bigger budgets. And what we tend to drive home also is the integration of a charitable component in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
It's really important.
So are you involved with some of the sports as well? I know you guys are involved with Live Nation. Is that correct?
We're involved with directly with a brand called Republic Live. And Republic Live, in collaboration with AEG, is who we just catered backstage at the Rolling Stones for all the crew catering.
Okay.
So that was a little bit of rock and roll, and we liked it.
Very nice.
We're the backstage crew caterers for the Boots and Hearts Music Festival that's coming up, and with some other initiatives that they're doing. And that is rooted in relationships that I've had for years. I was fortunate to work on Virgin Music Fest, on the original Boots and Hearts Music Festival, on something that was called Edge Fest, on a country music festival.
Yep.
And, rock and roll was a big passion. I used to have very large mobile kitchens. And we were fortunate to travel a little bit with some of the Tragically Hip tour. And that's another whole world unto itself. And that's where I trade in a tie for a bandana, and off we go. So it's pretty cool.
I was actually involved in the music industry years back, working with Live Nation as well. So I thought maybe we would have crossed paths then. You never know.
Well, we probably would have. I did a lot of work with Live Nation. And that's who had spearheaded Virgin Fest.
Yep.
And those were great experiences. Virgin Fest had many events on Toronto Island, which was an incredible learning experience, because it's one thing to do an event on dry land. It's another thing to bring 30,000 people to an island and feed them and water them and put up the stage and the lighting. So, when you talk about moving parts,
there's a few.
To be fair, nobody does it better than rock and roll.
Wow.
So. Yeah.
So just before we get into weddings and get into business, what is it like to cater for the celebrity and the music? Like, it must be a little bit different, or?
You know what? It is. And this is a frequent question I'm asked. And the truth of the matter is one's own personality is what's going to define the relationship with these people. My history and my work career always allowed me to engage with people who were in the public eye. And so my attitude from the beginning was, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. And if I kept that definition, then I was always honest, straightforward, and forthright with people. And what I can tell any of your young listeners is, do not try to be something that you are not, because those who are in the public eye have sort of hypersensitive radar to these things. And I've seen young people just immediately get discredited because they weren't being honest. So my approach with anybody who's a public figure has always been to be honest. And in fact, I had a custom sign made for all my rock and roll buffets, and what it said was, dinner options. 1, take it. 2, leave it. And even people of a high profile would come in and they would laugh.
Yeah, that's pretty
You
funny.
know, and I think, again, it's just that sort of honest approach. One night we were cooking at Virgin Fest, and behind me there was a bit of a hype, and I turned around and I saw Dave Grohl walking over with his agent. And the agent, the handler, was just so nervous, you know, because, oh my God, I'm coming with Dave Grohl, and he wants this, he wants that. So they came behind me, and I pretended effectively to ignore them. And they said, she said to me, Mr. Grohl would like his steak done this particular way. And without turning around, I said, you can tell Mr. Grohl he's going to get his steak the way I give it to him. And so everybody around me just paused, expecting some sort of nuclear fallout. And what ended up happening was he just laughed. He put his arm around me and he put his plate in front and he said, I'm happy to take whatever you give me. And that was it.
Amazing.
And then he asked if he could have a set of tongs and a knife, and he jumped on the grill for a moment. And
Oh, really?
yeah, of course. You know, I mean, literally, truly, like, I've always taken an attitude that just treat people like normal human beings.
Right.
That's
Maybe it's more the agents that are always worked up about trying to please them than it is.
Everybody's hyper about everything.
Yeah, of course.
Everybody's hyper. It's just unnecessary angst.
Well, it sounds like a cool experience.
It was.
That's for sure.
It was.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about weddings.
Sure.
So our audience right now is a lot. We do have some brides and as well as industry folks.
Fantastic.
So I know that you've worked with a lot of our industry planners, I'm sure, at some of your venues. So why don't we talk about what venues you are currently with? Because you have quite a platform over there.
You know, yeah, thanks. I mean, a general statement is 10tation Event Catering has a lot of tenure in the industry. We have a great reputation. We take a lot of pride in what we do. We offer a boutique style service, even though we're larger than what people would envision a boutique to be. There's a little bit of a misconception about the way venues work, especially as they relate to caterers. We are fortunate to be preferred vendors at virtually every venue in the city. We don't play favorites. The real skill in event planning and catering is being able to take a person's vision and then find the specific solution. So what we want to do more than anything is align someone's vision with a specific venue. There's also a bit of an obligation in the industry to collaborate in a very egalitarian way. And so what we're able to do is provide many recommendations for venues that suit the couple's style, but then also allow us to execute the type of menu that they would like. What a lot of younger planners forget is if you sell somebody a very extravagant menu, the immediate requirement is for an enhanced number of chefs. If you enhance the number of chefs, by definition, you need more space. If you enhance the menu, by definition, you need more refrigeration. And if you start applying a specific menu and selling that to the bride and groom before adhering to the venue requirements, then you find yourself in a very compromised position because you may not be able to execute the vision. So, you know, one recommendation I give to people is pick your caterer first. Because the venue itself, once we talk about geography and parking and a lot of the necessities that come with planning a function like this, ultimately it comes down to, can we pull off this meal? And so, you know, one venue rarely is deemed better than another in a general sense. And we just want to find the right spot for the right couple.
So when they're looking at a menu, more or less, what you're saying is you should be looking at catering before because you don't know the capacity of what the kitchen of that venue can handle.
100%.
Interesting.
Most
I did not know
venues,
that.
ironically, are ill-suited to conduct food-based events. And I don't mean that the venues are bad.
Yeah.
I just mean that I'm constantly seeing new venues evolve. Their primary motivation is to host events. If we understand events to be primarily rooted in food and beverage service and then audiovisual and speaking engagements, then why would you not build a sufficient kitchen adjacent to the space?
Right.
But it rarely happens. Of course, people want front of house space because that's where they think the top priority is. as it is, because mathematically speaking, there are obligations to have X number of square footage to accommodate volume of people, which aligns with the liquor license. So it makes sense at front of house, but you can't necessarily pull off a 5-star menu in a 2x3 closet. It's just basic needs.
Okay.
So yeah.
That's
So bring your caterer first.
That's interesting.
That's the moral
So you
of that
guys,
story.
do you guys have an actual like kitchen and event space, or you are boutique and you are going to you're partnered with all these different venues?
So 10tation Event Catering is located in Etobicoke, and we have quite a large facility that serves as our head office and our kitchen. We are off-premise caterers, which by definition means we do not have a venue that we operate out of exclusively. What tends to happen is a lot of the preliminary preparation and mise en place is done at our kitchen. Then adhering to every food handling standard imaginable, the food items are packaged and shipped with a series of experts to a particular venue where we unpack and then do final preparation, plating and execution of the event on site. So it's no small feat, and it really does require a lot of expertise, and it's not for the faint of heart.
So what's the process when you're working with a couple? Do they come primarily through a venue, or does a couple seek you out? And then what's kind of the relationship?
I think generally speaking, it's a combination of both. Sociologically and habitually, people are stuck in this idea of choosing a venue first, which I know why. Venues are the types of things that will evaporate. There's always constant talk about a 2-year waiting list and so on and so forth. So people should be well advised to secure a venue. I just think they need to align their thinking with the caterer at a very early stage, earlier than they're currently doing. So people will come to us from our history and our reputation of the firm, but then it is important for us to cultivate great relationships with venues, because they do serve to provide us with a lot of viable leads, and in this case in the form of bride and grooms. Absolutely.
Are you providing taste testings beforehand with couples? Like how far out do a couple need to give you like head counts in order for you to be able to be prepared for an event?
The ultimate reality with a company like ours, and I choose those words specifically because everybody runs a little bit differently, but the general process is, of course, a brief introduction. We capture what their vision and sort of mission is with this event, because everybody does have different cultural roots, different obligations, different thoughts, different feelings, religious considerations. So we have those general discussions. Then we will craft a menu and budget for the couple. Once we have at least a verbal commitment to proceed, then we'll invite them to our office where we have a lovely captain's tasting table, and we will wine and dine the couple, and we will serve them the meal that they anticipate serving at their wedding.
Okay.
Sorry, excuse me. With respect to the head count, caterers like us are so healthy and homemade that we respectfully request 2 weeks in advance, but that's more logistics based than it is specific to the food.
Okay.
Your food, when you work with 10tation Event Catering, does not come to our facility until 48 hours before your event. And then between that 48-hour mark and the execution of the event is when we slice and dice and prep and package and ship and all the fun things that are involved in catering.
Okay, so I understand. So there's an event planning component as well?
Correct.
With the 10tation event? Okay, so...
Yeah, here's where I'll respond to this. This will create a bit of controversy, but, without taking anything away from the multi-talented group that are event planners, what I will say, being rooted in catering for my entire career, is that caterers do all the heavy lifting. And again, for the event planners out there, we love collaborating. There is a lot of work that is done by an event planner that we would not, could not, should not be involved in. But caterers absorb a lot of the traditional event planning for a number of reasons. One is nobody is more intimately involved in your event than the caterer. We are involved in every single aspect by necessity. We have to know everything going on. The second part is the Canadian culture is not such, generally, that hiring a wedding planner or coordinator is automatic. Certain people of social and economic classes will automatically hire event planners and wedding planners, but I'd say the average person doesn't feel that that's a necessity. That's largely because 10tation Event Catering, and in fact some of our competitors, have incredibly talented planners that have chosen catering. And I think that's an important distinction, right? Because a caterer, in a very sort of Wikipedia way, is a person who provides food and beverage service at a social or corporate engagement. Caterers, the way I look at it, and with all the very talented people that I work with at 10tation, these people they know up to the minute what is happening. One of my colleagues we're the platinum sponsors of the Toronto International Film Festival. And one of my colleagues, Jenny Taylor, she's running 24 events during the film festival, many happening simultaneously, at many different locations. So one could argue that person is the more qualified event planner, but it doesn't say that on her business card.
Right.
So yeah, it's a combination.
How big is your team?
The entire team at 10tation, we have the luxury of scaling our staff based on time of year, based on current economic environment. So generally speaking, and on any given Tuesday, there's 50 to 60 people in the house. In the fourth quarter, and we operate on a traditional calendar year, so in the fourth quarter when we're into holiday season, it's not unusual for us to be feeding 100 people the complimentary lunch that comes with working at 10tation. And there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of depth and breadth to our kitchen. Different cultural backgrounds, different nationalities, and certainly in a city like Toronto, that's a very beneficial group to have on your team. So.
That was my next question: is all the different cultures that you see in weddings and corporate? Like you must have or chefs that are kind of geared towards specific types of food, or
we do. We have a very rigid organizational structure because a company of our size and scope needs to pay very close attention to how food is handled, how it is prepared, how it is segmented. Issues of cross-contamination and allergies, etc., are very, very real. And so we have specialists in each category from both a pragmatic standpoint and then from a cultural standpoint. And what I'm very proud to say is that, I can walk into our kitchen and say to one of our colleagues, like, I've just been asked for a menu from Guyana. And somebody in that room has direct experience, either from their professional career or from their families, how to prepare those dishes. And it really cuts down the time involved in trying to secure those diverse and unique menus. So, how
many chefs might be on an event at one time?
That's really dependent on the type of event. And, with the idea that we have a lot of pride in our food, in our style, in our presentation. We scale the number of chefs directly related to what the food is first, and then logically we want to scale it to the number of guests. So one area we excel, in addition to the quality of our food, is the style of service. Right? I often tell people that I'm not concerned about the food. And I have the luxury of saying that because we have a magnificent team that leads the food. David's passion is for food. My passion is for people, right? When the Food Network evolved, everybody became a foodie. And, from a caterer's perspective, that's a bit frustrating because you're engaged in conversations that people have only parsed bits of information with respect to the food. But, knowing what a particular dish takes to prepare requires then to do mathematics on the chefs and then to take and break it down throughout the way, which I've always said is pretty ironic because I failed grade 10 math 3 times.
Oh, really?
But if you ask me to take a 12-inch pizza and divide it up and tell me how much money I'm going to make and how I need to sell it and how I need to prep it, I can do that
problem.
with a sticky note and a sharp pencil. So
That's what the math should have been.
that's what the math should have been. They should have taught me everything in school by putting it into a song and teaching me with food. And
Instead of bed mass.
Exactly.
Remember bed
It's
mass.
awful. It's awful. I don't even know. With 3 young daughters now, I'm seeing things that I don't even understand anymore.
So it's interesting then, client experience is a lot of your focus. And so how do you kind of go about discussing with clients after the fact? Like, what was your experience with 10tation's events?
After an event is to, well, the thing about our industry, unlike some others, is we know immediately if someone is happy or if someone isn't. And so, I understand, and I'm a businessman first, and, we talk a lot about downloading after an event, and we talk about, having these meetings to discuss, to make improvements, and those certainly happen. But a client is not shy to tell you in a more immediate nature what went right and what went wrong. Where I think the onus is on young caterers and planners out there is to acquire that information, which everybody seems very good at in this day and age. What people, generally speaking, are not very good at is then doing something with that information. But it matters. And if we don't take the data, if we don't parse it properly, if we don't put it in the right location, if we don't communicate that to the relevant people in that area, then we're never going to improve. And one thing I've always tried to do personally and encourage my teams to do is genuinely and sincerely leave your ego at the door. Right? And again, it's a little bit of a cliche thing. But the idea is if someone in my position is trying to collaborate with one of my colleagues, and I, by definition, have more experience, then they should be open to receiving the constructive criticism, because my motivation is that they improve. Their motivation should be to please that client, because in catering and events, you are judged only by the last event you conducted. There's no other measuring stick. You can succeed at 10 events in a row, and then you fail at number 11, and now you're back at 0 and you're being judged by number 11. But the idea is the more like-minded people we get in the room, the quicker we can expedite the ideas, and the more efficiently we can translate our vision into the multiple platforms that exist out there. Your employees are your greatest ambassadors. And this is the number one rule when you're managing people, right? And it doesn't, in fact, matter what you're selling, right? We are selling an experience. And so if the individuals selling the experience do not feel like they're having a healthy experience at their office, it is virtually impossible for them to have the ambition and the language map and the passion and the enthusiasm to be able to sell your product. So, being a brand man for much of my life, the second thing I did at the office was collaborate with David to rework the brand and to position it in such a way that it communicated a message in both a subliminal way and in a very obvious way. So, another thing I would tell young planners and or caterers that are listening is focus on your brand. Long gone are the days when your brand will organically evolve and find its home. It's virtually impossible. So figure out the brand. Figure out how to communicate the message in long form, and then more importantly, figure out your elevator pitch. Because nobody cares more than 30 seconds. Except VIP Collective.
I thought there were 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Well, it changed. It's now 30.
It's 30 seconds.
It's 30 seconds.
It's an Instagram story.
That's right. Exactly.
Like you said, you can't just have a logo and kind of let it fly. You really need to be a storyteller within your brand. Do you feel like that applies for catering as well?
Yes, I absolutely do. And I think that we, caterers, event planners, we have the single most luxurious industry to work in to be able to tell a story. Because other industries are forced and being a man who worked in branding and brand marketing, other industries are forced to create a brand, to take what is fiction and try to make it reality. Caterers and event planners have all the reality they want, right? We are working on a daily basis on fundraising galas. We are working in charitable events. We are working with corporations. We're working on the Rolling Stones. Like, who has the luxury of a constant level of content?
Yeah.
Now what the trick is aligning that content with the brand, and then allowing people to interact with our brand, but from a position of thought leadership, from a position of culture, from a position of humor, right? I think there's a lot that's lost when you don't just take yourself less seriously. So now our brand has taken this direction where, you know, as we develop new markets and new products and services, we're trying to communicate, generally speaking, through common sense. You know, everybody, listen, food and beverage and special events comes down to this. It must look good, it must taste good, it must smell good, and it must be plentiful. And I don't care what country you are from, what part of the world you are from. One thing that I love about my work is how equalizing it makes all of us. Because whether you're from Italy or Spain or India or China or anywhere for that matter, you want to welcome your guests. You want to be hospitable. You want them to be fed. You want them to be happy. You want them to be finding pleasure in the experience. And it truly doesn't matter where it comes from. So for us, the priority is just to show people through our brand, we're all the same.
Yep.
And we want you to be happy.
With all your insight in the industry and, you know, the years of experience you have, what are some of your takeaways and your do's and don'ts for planning a wedding?
Right. You know, when I was teaching at George Brown, it was to event planners and wedding planners and event planners, and I would stand at the front of this big lecture hall, and the first thing I would always say is, if you are planning on having a wedding, stop the planning and don't have a wedding. and of course, for all of you out there listening, please understand that's my personal viewpoint. Please visit www.10tation.com for all of your wedding planning needs. But the reality is, and I recently read an article, that weddings are at their lowest point in 100 years. And I understand the logic behind that. I'm raising 3 young daughters who are very intimately concerned with experiences over material goods. Weddings, however, have become an experience that is outside what this new generation thinks is a valid experience. And the reason why I say don't have a wedding is because it's a one-night party. If you are going to do it, make it the best possible party you can. The first thing I will tell you is, please do not plan it on a long weekend. So this is some insight from a businessman and from a consumer. Listen up, everyone. No one wants to come to your wedding on a long weekend. If the purpose of your wedding is to invite people to share your joy, to share this life experience with you, please understand that they are more concerned with going to the cottage than your wedding. Don't plan it on a long weekend.
What about a New Year's?
People are traditional with the social experiences that they like to have. When you try to bridge the gap between your wedding and other traditional social experiences, you lose part of the audience. And people are complainers by nature. So even those that are excited to share your joy are going to complain. And then you're just setting the stage for an experience that is less than what you envision. So don't pick a long weekend if you're going to host a wedding. Don't overspend. Right? I'm begging all the young brides out there. you can have a beautiful experience without overspending. Now, this is contrary to everything salesmen like me say on a regular basis, but you need to pick and choose what you spend. One time I sat down with a bride and groom, and the first thing that the bride said when she sat down at the table with her fiance was, I would like to increase the flower budget from $5,000 to $8,000. Now, if one has the means to do so, then I encourage you to do whatever you'd like. And I'm grateful for the sale. If you do not have the means and you are only doing it because you think that your cousin who had her wedding last year spent $8,000 and now you need to spend $8,000, I encourage you not to do it. In that same vein, I encourage brides and grooms to choose things that are relevant to the experience, not relevant to what they perceive a wedding should be.
Right.
Take the money, take the $3,000, apply it to your honeymoon, and go for it.
Right.
So that's another significant thing. And what that leads to is my advice to always is let your personality show through in this function, right? The vision of what a wedding should be often overlaps what a wedding could be. And nobody wants to come to the same function. If you're getting married, I want to come and experience the wedding through your eyes.
Right.
Not mine, not what a particular magazine positions a wedding to be. And for everybody out there that will want to make comments, I don't actually believe in any trends whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I have it's not part of my language map. The current trends, I often get confused because I try to track it back. Who started the trend?
Right.
Who decided this was a trend? If you like a particular flower, but it was only popular 2 years ago, I don't understand because flowers have been around since the dawn of time. Just pick your flowers.
Right.
I don't need to see what a magazine tells me a wedding should be.
Right. I think the social media change has brought people to this now wanting to keep up with what their cousin did, or, so it's really changed kind of how. Of
course.
You've probably seen a change since.
Oh, I've seen dozens of changes in the wedding business.
And
right?
especially since like maybe 2013, 2014, when Instagram really started to take off.
Of course.
Then that's when everyone was documenting what they're doing and everybody wants, right? So.
And listen, and you should. And speaking of social media, another little tip I would love to give brides and grooms is hire a really great photographer. Mm-hmm. You do want to document this day, and there's nothing bad about doing that. One advice about the photography is my recommendation is not to do all of your photography in the 90 minutes between the ceremony and when people are expecting dinner. I would much prefer to see brides and grooms scheduling like 4 or 5 20-minute chunks throughout the entire day where they're doing their photography and capturing different moments. It doesn't need to be this regimented, where is the father and he must come right now and take a picture. I think if you break it up throughout the course of the night, you're going to get different moods, different attitudes, and therefore different content.
Yep.
The other bit about photography and social media that I would recommend to brides and grooms is, today is your wedding day. Put your phone away. Mm-hmm. And if you want to document your day live on social media, there are professionals you can hire who will come, who will take over your feed, and who will be able to take all the photos and the videos and post it and apply the hashtags and all that fun stuff for you.
Yep.
The one thing I caution brides and grooms all the time is, if you are going to go to this effort, be present from beginning to end, because it is a fleeting moment, even though it's an enormous day. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to go through this, please remember, it's your day. Mm-hmm. It's not the 100 or 200 people in attendance. It's your day.
Yep.
So eat is another thing I tell
Very
brides
important.
and grooms. Please eat.
Yes. I've seen people faint.
So have I. Okay.
Yep.
The other thing I tell brides and grooms is coordinate specific points with your new spouse where you have timeouts. throughout the course of the evening. 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Take these minutes, go be alone for a few minutes in your bridal suite, outside in the parking lot, and then just capture that moment together.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be a day about the two of you.
Yeah.
And one of the things that frustrates a guy that like me that's been in the business for 30 some odd years is weddings have gone from what is supposed to be a traditional joining and celebration of love to very much a business.
Right.
And couples fall into this trap, and they don't realize that they're investing all this time, investing all this money, and then the day is over.
Right. I think it's good. It poses more of a reflection for
Correct.
people to kind of sit back and go, wait a minute, why am I doing
Right.
this? So,
And I'm not trying to be overly philosophical if the viewers are watching. It's just really, if I understand why you're doing what you want to do,
Yeah.
it helps me understand your motivation. Therefore, I can make appropriate recommendations, and therefore we can expedite things.
For sure.
Right?
Yep.
All I really want to do is get from point A to point B in the loveliest, most respectable, expeditious way possible. And that's as simple as it can be.
I get it. It makes sense.
There we go.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in today.
Thank you. This was
because
fun.
This has been a hoot.
This was totally fun. I encourage anybody who gets an invitation to be here to come here. This is really great.
Thank you.
for
That's
having
so
me.
nice.
Yeah, it's just such a pleasure.
Well,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome to come back anytime.
All right.
And I'm
Tomorrow.
looking forward to maybe seeing a couple of these delicious dishes
I
here
love it.
soon.
You have an open invite for dinner.
All right, guys, that is it for episode number 11 of the VIP Collective. I hope you liked the video. If you did like the video, please feel free to hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you can see next week's video when we sit down with Brittany Gray of Fancy Face. Until then, guys, thank you so much always for your likes, comments, shares. And we'll see you next week on the VIP Collective.